Have you ever stopped to think why the modern woman, who theoretically has all the sexual freedom in the world, is the most sexually unhappy in history? Why is it that she, who can have relationships with whomever she wants, whenever she wants, however she wants, constantly complains that she can't find true satisfaction? Today we'll delve into the greatest paradox of contemporary female sexuality and discover why the so-called sexual revolution was actually the biggest psychological trap ever created for women. Get ready, because what you're about to hear will shatter everything you believed about female freedom, pleasure, and sexual fulfillment. Freud always said that human sexuality is much more complex than it appears on the surface. It involves not only the physical body, but the individual's entire psychic, emotional, and spiritual structure. When we analyze modern women and their relationship with sex, we find one of the most fascinating cases of collective neurosis in human history. They were convinced they could completely separate sex from emotion, physical pleasure from emotional bonding, bodily satisfaction from spiritual fulfillment. The result? An entire generation of sexually active but emotionally devastated women. The first thing you need to understand is that the sexual freedom sold to women was nothing more than a sophisticated manipulation to transform them into more available sexual objects. Before, she needed to be conquered, courted, and respected, to surrender sexually. Now she surrenders on the first night and still feels empowered by it. In reality, she was programmed to do exactly what men have always wanted: easy sex, no commitment, no emotional responsibility. She thought she was liberating herself, but in reality, she was enslaving herself to the most primitive male desires. Freud would say that this woman is suffering from a profound dissociation between her body and her soul. She has learned to use sex as a tool of validation, a way to feel desired, a way to exert power over men. But in the process, she has completely lost touch with her sacred sexuality, with the capacity for true lovemaking, with the transcendent experience that sex can provide when it happens within a context of genuine love and mutual commitment. What strikes me most as an observer of the human condition is how these women psychologically justify their promiscuity. They've created a sophisticated vocabulary to disguise behaviors that, deep down, they know are self-destructive: exploring sexuality, breaking taboos, taking control of one's own pleasure, not being limited by social conventions. These are euphemisms designed to hide a much harsher reality. They're using casual sex as a drug to soothe deep emotional needs that have never been resolved. But here's what's truly disturbing. The more sexual partners a woman has, the less capable she becomes of deeply connecting with any of them. Each casual sexual experience creates a layer of emotional callus that protects her from vulnerability, but also prevents her from experiencing true intimacy. It's as if she loses pieces of her soul with each casual encounter, until she reaches the point where there's nothing genuine left to offer a truly important partner. Freud always warned about the dangers of sexuality disconnected from love. He knew that when we reduce sex to a mere bodily function, we lose access to the deeper, more transformative dimensions of the sexual experience. Modern women have sex but rarely make love. They have physical orgasms but never experience the spiritual ecstasy that occurs when body, mind, and soul unite in perfect harmony with another person. And we can't ignore how this affects her ability to choose suitable partners. The sexually liberated woman has developed a pathological preference for men who don't value her. She's attracted to men who treat her poorly, who use her sexually and then disappear, who never truly commit. Why? Because these men activate her neurotic childhood patterns, where love was always associated with suffering, rejection, and abandonment. The kind, respectful man who genuinely wants to get to know her deeply and build something serious makes her uncomfortable. She doesn't know how to deal with someone who treats her with dignity because she's completely lost touch with her own value. She's become accustomed to being treated like a sexual object, and now anything other than that seems dull, predictable, and lacking in chemistry. It's a complete reversal of values that systematically leads her to choose partners who will perpetuate her emotional trauma. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this dynamic is how it affects the experience of female sexual pleasure. A truly sexually liberated woman should experience profound pleasure, transcendent orgasms, and complete satisfaction. In practice, most sexually liberated women never experience a real orgasm in their lives. They fake it, simulate it, and put on a show, because they've learned that their function is to satisfy the male ego, not to seek their own sexual fulfillment. Authentic female sexuality is receptive, intuitive, cyclical, and emotional. It needs security, trust, time, and emotional connection to fully blossom. But modern women have been convinced they should function like men. Fast, mechanical, disconnected sex, focused solely on physical climax. They're trying to force their sexual nature to behave in completely unnatural ways, and the result is frustration, emptiness, and an inability to find true satisfaction. Freud would say that this woman suffers from a sexual performance neurosis, where she has transformed even the most intimate act of human life into a theatrical performance. She doesn't have sex to satisfy herself. She has sex to impress, to maintain male interest, to prove she is modern and cool. It's a form of psychological prostitution where she sells not only her body, but her sexual authenticity in exchange for temporary male validation. And here we come to one of the cruelest contradictions in this entire dynamic. The sexually liberated woman is paradoxically the most enslaved of all. She can't say no when she doesn't want to have sex because that would be square. She can't express her true sexual preferences because it might seem complicated. She can't ask for emotional exclusivity because that would be possessive. She's created a sexual prison where she must always be available, always excited, always satisfied, even when her soul is screaming for something completely different. What fascinates me most is how these women deal with virginity and sexual inexperience. A young woman who chooses to preserve her virginity for someone special is treated as an anomaly, as someone repressed, old-fashioned, who doesn't know herself. In fact, this young woman may be the only truly free person in the room, because she still has a choice, still has something precious to offer, and hasn't yet been tainted by the emotional callousness that comes with multiple empty sexual experiences. But modern society has transformed promiscuity into a virtue and chastity into a pathology. They have completely inverted values, convincing women that the more sexual partners they have, the more empowered they will be. In reality, each casual partner is a small death of the female soul, a diminishment of the capacity for deep connection, an erosion of emotional sensitivity that makes true love increasingly difficult to achieve. And we can't forget the impact this has on motherhood. Sexually promiscuous women have developed such an instrumental and disconnected relationship with their own bodies that they often no longer perceive them as a sacred temple capable of generating life. They see their bodies only as a source of hedonistic pleasure, not as the biological and spiritual miracle they truly are. When they finally decide to become pregnant, they struggle with profound emotional difficulties, trying to connect with the sacred experience of pregnancy. Freud always said that female sexuality was intrinsically linked to reproductive capacity, not only biologically, but psychologically. When a woman completely dissociates sex from love, commitment, and procreative potential, she is fragmenting her own psychic nature. Part of her wants to be loved and respected. Part of her wants to be desired and used. This internal conflict generates psychic tension that manifests itself through anxiety, depression, and compulsive behaviors. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of this whole dynamic is how it affects these women's ability to recognize true love when it finally appears. They've become so accustomed to superficial relationships based solely on physical attraction and immediate gratification that they don't know how to deal with someone who truly sees them, knows them, and values them beyond the sexual aspect. Real love seems dull compared to the addictive intensity of the toxic relationships they've become accustomed to. It's as if they've developed the emotional palate of a sugar addict who's lost the ability to appreciate subtle and complex flavors. True love, with its patience, its constancy, its emotional depth, seems insipid to someone addicted to the emotional roller coaster of dysfunctional relationships. They literally can't recognize what's good for them anymore because their emotional references have been completely corrupted. And here we arrive at the cruelest paradox. The woman who should be the most sexually free in history is actually the most frustrated. She has access to more partners, more information, more techniques, more social freedom than any previous generation, but rarely experiences the deep and lasting sexual satisfaction that should be the goal of all this liberation. Why? Because true sexual satisfaction comes not from the quantity of experiences, but from the quality of the emotional and spiritual connection with one's partner. What saddens me most is realizing that many of these women genuinely believe they are happy and fulfilled. They post sensual photos on social media, talk about loving themselves, about not depending on anyone, about living intensely. But anyone with a basic understanding of psychoanalysis can see through the facade. True sexual happiness doesn't need to be constantly proven or defended. When someone spends so much time and energy convincing the world that they are satisfied, it's because deep down they know something is deeply wrong. Freud always warned that excessive sexual repression was harmful, but he never advocated promiscuity as a solution. He understood that healthy sexuality occurs within a context of mature love, mutual commitment, and shared spiritual growth. The sexual revolution completely distorted his ideas, using his authority to justify behaviors he would never have approved. True female sexual freedom isn't the ability to have sex with anyone, anytime, anyhow. It's the ability to consciously choose with whom, when, and how to give yourself sexually based on deep values and genuine self-respect. It's knowing how to say no when something doesn't resonate with your soul, even if it seems superficially pleasurable. It's having the patience to wait for someone who values you fully, not just sexually. But our society has sold women a definition of freedom that is actually slavery in disguise. They've been convinced that resisting sexual urges is repression, that having standards is elitism, that wanting commitment is neediness. In reality, the ability to resist immediate gratification in favor of higher goals is the mark of psychological maturity. A woman who can say no to casual sex because she's saving her sexual energy for something more meaningful demonstrates strength, not weakness. And we can't ignore how this dynamic affects the men these women relate to. Men too have been corrupted by this unhealthy sexual culture. They've learned they can easily access sex without offering anything in return beyond a few hours of superficial attention. They've completely lost the ability to court a woman, to gradually win her over, to invest emotionally in a relationship. Why would they do this when they can get sex effortlessly? The result is a generation of emotionally immature men who see women only as objects of temporary sexual gratification. They never learn to value a woman for her deeper qualities because they never had to make the effort to access her body. Female sexual ease has created a male emotional laziness that is destroying the ability of both sexes to build genuine relationships. Freud would say that we are witnessing the collapse of civilization through the degradation of human sexuality. When a society loses the ability to channel sexual energy constructively through committed relationships and responsible procreation, it enters into moral and spiritual decline. Widespread promiscuity is always a sign of cultural degeneration, not progress. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect is how this dynamic is being passed on to future generations. Teenage girls grow up seeing adult women behaving sexually irresponsibly and believe this is normal and desirable. They don't realize they're being groomed for a life of sexual frustration and emotional emptiness. Popular culture, social media, and even formal education are conspiring to create another generation of sexually dysfunctional women. And here we come to a truth no one wants to face. Most sexually liberated women secretly envy women who have made more conservative choices. They see a married, faithful woman who has built a solid family and feel a pang of deep regret. They observe the genuine intimacy between a committed couple and realize what they've lost along the way. But this envy is quickly repressed and transformed into defensive judgment. She's repressed. She wasted her youth. She doesn't know herself. She's dependent on her husband. These are defense mechanisms to protect their self-esteem and justify choices that, deep down, they know were self-destructive. It's easier to criticize women who made different choices than to admit that they may have lost something precious along the path to sexual liberation. What strikes me most is how these women develop completely dysfunctional relationships with committed men. They're attracted to married men, boyfriends, or men in committed relationships, not because they're bad people, but because these men represent something they never had: emotional stability, commitment, and relational depth. They unconsciously sabotage other people's relationships because they can't bear to see what they've lost. Freud would explain this as a form of ego envy, where a person tries to destroy in others what they cannot build within themselves. The promiscuous woman can no longer truly commit to anyone, so she develops an unconscious compulsion to prevent others from having what she cannot have. It's a form of revenge against her own inability to genuinely love. And we cannot forget how this dynamic affects female spirituality. Women were traditionally seen as the guardians of the spiritual values of family and society. Their sexuality was intrinsically connected to the sacred, to the ability to bring new life into the world, to the mystical experience of the union between body and soul. Modern promiscuity has completely desacralized female sexuality, transforming it into mere hedonistic entertainment. Modern women have lost touch with their priestly nature, with their ability to transform the sexual act into a transcendent experience. They engage in sex like animals, driven only by basic biological impulses, without any connection to deeper dimensions of human experience. It's a civilizational regression disguised as progress, an animalization of the human condition presented as evolution. But perhaps most tragically, this woman truly believes she is in control of her sex life. She talks about choices, about bodily autonomy, about empowerment through sexuality. In reality, she is completely controlled by impulses she doesn't understand, by needs she doesn't recognize, by neurotic patterns she can't break. Her sexual freedom is actually a disguised compulsion, a desperate attempt to fill emotional voids through physical gratification. Freud always said that true freedom comes from deep self-knowledge and the ability to make conscious choices based on an understanding of our deepest motivations. The sexually compulsive woman is not free. She is a slave to unconscious patterns that systematically lead her to self-destructive behavior. She confuses impulsivity with spontaneity, promiscuity with freedom, and emotional emptiness with independence. And here we come to the most crucial point of this entire analysis. Is it possible to reverse this process? Freud believed so, but only through a process of profound self-knowledge that would allow women to reconnect with their authentic sexual nature. This doesn't mean becoming repressed or puritanical, but rather developing discernment about when, with whom, and how to express their sexuality in a way that honors their deepest essence. It means learning to say no to experiences that seem pleasurable on the surface, but leave a bitter taste in the soul. It means having the patience to wait for someone who values you completely, not just as a sexual object. It means rediscovering the sacred within sexuality, the ability to truly make love, not just have sex mechanically. But the reality is that few women in this situation have the courage to do this inner work, because it means questioning the entire cultural narrative that convinced them they were right to behave promiscuously. It's easier to keep pretending they're happy, medicating the symptoms of emptiness with more empty sexual experiences, perpetuating the self-destructive cycle indefinitely. What saddens me most is realizing that many of these women could have had completely different sex lives if they had received proper guidance when they were young. If someone had explained that true sexual satisfaction comes from the quality of connection, not the quantity of partners, that the ability to give yourself deeply to one person is far more valuable than the ability to give yourself superficially to many, that preserving something precious for someone special is an act of self-love, not repression. But our culture sold them a seductive lie. and now they're paying the price for that illusion with their souls. The real tragedy isn't that they made questionable sexual choices, but that they lost the ability to recognize and appreciate true love when it finally appears. They traded the possibility of a deeply satisfying sex life for an endless series of empty and frustrating experiences. So my advice to any young woman just beginning her sexual life is simple. Don't believe the lie that quantity equals quality. Don't be convinced that preserving your intimacy for someone special is outdated or repressive. Don't confuse promiscuity with freedom, nor impulse with conscious choice. Remember that your sexuality is one of your most powerful forces, capable of creating life, building deep bonds, and providing transcendent experiences. Don't waste it on casual encounters that leave you feeling emptier with each encounter. And for women already trapped in this self-destructive dynamic, know that it's not too late to change. But it requires courage to stop, reflect, and reconnect with deeper values. It requires the humility to admit that perhaps you've been deceived about what truly constitutes sexual liberation. It requires the patience to rebuild your capacity for true intimacy, even if it means being alone for a while you heal the emotional wounds that led you to promiscuity. The true female sexual revolution is not the ability to have sex without emotional consequences, but the ability to make love with one's whole soul. It's not the freedom to give oneself to anyone, but the wisdom to give oneself only to those who deserve it. It's not the rejection of all traditional values, but the ability to discern which values truly serve one's deepest well-being. Remember, this channel doesn't romanticize, sugarcoat, or soften the reality of sexuality and human relationships. This is pure psychoanalysis, unfiltered truth, and a merciless analysis of the deceptions our culture perpetuates. If you're ready to question everything you believed about sexual freedom and discover what truly constitutes authentic sexual satisfaction, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because life is too short to be lived in denial, and true sexual happiness is only possible when we have the courage to look beyond cultural lies and reconnect with our deepest nature. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this, share this video. Sometimes the truth is the only antidote to poisons we didn't even know we were taking.